everyone, and welcome to our RTAP bi-monthly webinar series, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. If you haven't already, I'd like you to add your name and agency in the chat box so we can all get acquainted. And usually for these presentations, I would say to keep all questions until the end, but since we kind of have a small group and this is more based on you all learning how to make your Title VI program better, or if you have any questions on your Title VI program, feel free to stop me in the presentation, or you can add them to the chat box while we're going over things. Kara is here, and I think if you don't mind, Kara, would you watch the chat box for me to make sure that there's not questions I'm missing during?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Peyton Smith. I'm a GRA here at Kansas RTAP. And usually you all see me, if you've been to one of these presentations before, I've been facilitating them this past year. But today, this is my presentation, so I'll get to talk with you all about Title VI program development and recertification requirements. So the purpose of this webinar is to talk about the Title VI program development process through the lens of the Title VI resource that RTAP is working on currently. And this is in hopes of providing transit agencies with a better understanding of the individual components of the Title VI plan, while also providing some insight on how the resource can be used when it's published. Okay, so let me go to the next page. Okay, so I'll just go over a little bit what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we'll start with a Title VI overview. And for this, we'll just talk a little bit about what Title VI is exactly and why we have to do a Title VI program. And then we'll get into the Kansas RTAP resource. So looking at exactly how it's going to be structured and what you'll be able to do with it when we do publish it. And then I'll go into a little brief about every chapter that's going to be within the Title VI resource and talk a little bit about what's required of each of those things here in this presentation. And then finally, we'll look at other resources available. So these will be resources that I use to help develop the program, the guidebook for the program, and also things that agencies can use and supplement to the resource, but also while you're waiting for the resource to be published. Okay, so Title VI as a part of the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964, and it requires that no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal finance assistance. So if a recipient receiving federal finance assistance is found to have discriminated against a person, financial assistance can be terminated and legal action can be taken. To avoid a situation like this altogether and demonstrate voluntary compliance, an agency receiving federal funding, such as rural transit agencies in Kansas, must develop and adhere to a Title VI program. So I do want to preface a little bit. I'll be using words like recipient and subrecipient a lot for this presentation. And a recipient is someone who receives federal funding, and a subrecipient is like 5310 and 5311 agencies who receive funding from KDOT, who receives funding from the federal government. So whenever I'm saying a subrecipient must do this or must do that, I'm referring to transit agencies in Kansas or anyone who needs to have a Title VI program. And so a Title VI program is a document that displays an agency's commitment to equal treatment under the law, and then the actions that agencies take in to promote non-discrimination. Transit agencies who are direct or subrecipients of federal funds must develop a Title VI program to be adherent with the law, and this includes everyone who's here, 5310 and 5311 recipients, but it's not limited to, like, fixed route providers also have to have Title VI programs, and most agencies do. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about what the actual development resource is going to look like. So there will be 6 chapters, as we saw on the agenda, detailing new plan development. So each chapter will go into depth about what each section is and what is required of each agency within their Title VI program. And then within each chapter, there'll be a checklist of necessary information needed in each section. So this will be useful for agencies who are developing a new Title VI resource or already have one, and if they want a little bit more freedom or discretion within the things they are developing. So this will just be like the things that are necessary, but you can add to it. But then within each section, there's also sample templates provided by KDOT, the FDA, and other agencies that agencies can use directly to fill in, and then their Title VI programs can be made up of these templates. So while there's a little less discretion with these templates, they are super helpful and make sure that you are in compliance with Title VI. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and talk about each individual chapter that will be covered within the resource and kind of give you a brief about what each of these are required to have. So Title VI requires that the public be informed of their rights under Title VI and that a complaint process is available to them in the case of discrimination. The complaint process is presented in the resource in one chapter that is divided into 3 parts: notice to the public, complaint procedure, and complaint monitoring. Unlike some other aspects of the Title VI plan, the complaint process can be developed by the state DOT and adopted by subrecipients. So KDOT has developed a complaint procedure that fulfills all the federal requirements and provides agencies with templates to utilize. We'll briefly go over some aspects of this process. Like pictured here is the notice to the public that KDOT provides. And all an agency needs to do to fulfill this requirement is plug in the necessary information and make sure it's easily accessible to the public and available in languages identified during the 4-factor analysis, which we'll discuss a little bit later in this presentation. So as you see here for this notice of the public, it has like in big bold letters, big bold letters, the city of USA, and throughout the bullet points, they have other spots like that where you can fill in your agency's name or city, depending on circumstance, and places to fill in where your email should go and your website. So all you would have to do here with with most of the templates within the complaint process is just fill in your necessary information. So it's really easy with these templates to be able to be in compliance with Title VI. Okay, so the next 2 aspects are the complaint procedure and complaint monitoring, which again, KDOT has developed procedures for and should be utilized by subrecipients. The complaint procedure should be readily available for the public to access, and many agencies do this through posting the information on their website, but it should also be available in hard copy at request to be in compliance with the law. The complaint procedure walks through both the role of the agency and the complainant through every part of the complaint process possible. It includes an initial submission of a complaint, a referral to review officer, request for reconsideration, appeal, and submission to KDOT. So while the complaint procedure already has all of these steps in place, not every complaint will go all the way to submission to KDOT. But it's nice to have in case something were to happen like that. So most complaints might happen to go to referral to review officer, and you have all the necessary steps to be able to complete that part of the process. But it does have everything included in case something else were to happen. It also provides like timelines and any other information either party would need to know so that everyone's on the same page. So even like how long should an agency be processing complaints, everything like that is included within the complaint procedure. And all of this information and the sample documents will be available in the resource. And the complaint monitoring process is just keeping track of any complaints, investigations, or lawsuits that have occurred regarding the Title VI. So anything that you would have to use the complaint process for, you'll keep in a table within your Title VI program, and information like the date, the summary of the complaint or allegations, actions taken, status, and resolution all need to be documented. And it's important to just have a record of these. One, so that agencies can see like if there is something occurring often that maybe they need to address within their Title VI resource. But it's also important to have this for your triennial review as they'll be looking for any previous complaints, investigations, or lawsuits. Okay, so that was the complaint process and monitoring. And now we're going to move on to another aspect of the Title VI plan, which is the Public Involvement Plan, or PIP for short. And a PIP is an imperative aspect of any transportation planning effort that an agency partakes in. A PIP helps set the foundation for public engagement efforts and provides agencies with proactive and effective procedures and strategies for public engagement. The public participation plan should guide an agency's engagement activities and define the desired outcomes of the engagement process. And there are 6 things that must be within a PIP. That is the activities and services the agency provides, a description of activities that would warrant public participation, proactive public participation strategies to be employed by the agency, outreach methods to engage minority and limited English proficiency individuals, define the desired outcomes of an agency's participation efforts, and a summary of outreach efforts performed over the past 3 years. So this seems like a lot of things, but and these 6 points do need to be explicitly stated within a PIP in order for them to be in compliance with Title VI. But overall, the goal of a PIP is to just establish these 2 things on the slide. So what do you want to achieve with public participation efforts, and how can it be achieved while engaging limited English proficiency and other disadvantaged communities? So here on the screen, I have some examples of how an agency could do that and how they would talk about that within their plan. So what do you want to achieve with public participation efforts? This might be actively engaging transit riders, stakeholders, and members of the public in the decision-making process. And these are a couple of options, but ultimately it's up to the agency to decide what that means for them. But thankfully, KDOT and the FTA have menus of options to help guide the thinking of agencies, and both of those will be available in the resource. So yeah, I pulled up all of these from those menus that are available just to give you an example of what you could be thinking about when answering these types of questions, but also just what other agencies do and put within their Title VI plans as well. So yeah, when thinking about how you want to achieve public participation efforts, these are a couple examples, and that can just mean facilitating like effective communication or these big overall goals of how you want to achieve. But then you have to think about what are the steps within your plan that you're going to put to achieve it. So these have to be like action items and very specific things that you can do when thinking about public engagement efforts. So this can be utilizing different meeting sizes and formats, or having public opinion surveys to get widespread public opinion. And these are things you'll actually do when engaging with the public. So that's something to think about when you're developing your Title VI resource as well, for both this public involvement plan and in a little bit when we talk about the LEP plan, is that when you're establishing goals for how you want to engage the public, you really want them to be attainable for your agency so that you're able to actually do these things that you're putting within the plan and effectively engage the public. If you're putting things in these plans that you might not necessarily have the resources to be able to do, the plans just aren't effective then. So we can do these things at different levels, and they can be attainable for any size agency. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the other plan that's included in the Title VI resource, and this is the LEP, which stands for Limited English Proficiency, or the Language Access Plan. So I'll use these interchangeably as well. I think, and most of the time the FTA refers to it as an LEP plan. But a language access plan is a guide for agencies on how they will engage limited English proficiency persons and what steps they are taking to make sure LEP persons are engaged in the planning process, but also that agencies recognize the importance of their services to LEP individuals and making sure that they have adequate access to those services. So this is kind of a big undertaking, right? Making sure that disadvantaged communities and people that are most transit dependent have access to the services that you're providing, but also are involved within the planning process to make sure that their voices are heard. So it's an important part of the process, but can be overwhelming. And so that's why I split it into these 3 sections. So we'll talk about each 3, but recognizing, serving, and involving. So recognizing is analyzing the demographic makeup within a service. So just acknowledging and recognizing that there are LEP individuals within your area and exactly like what populations that makes up and what languages they're speaking so you can better accommodate them. Serving is recognizing how an agency can better service their community through developing a language access plan, or LEP, that improves services for LEP individuals. So this is just actually developing the LEP plan, going through the motions that we'll talk about here in a minute. And then involving, including LEP persons in the transit planning process. So like I said, for the public engagement plan, this just means actually utilizing the things that you put into the plan. and making sure that you're integrating the language access plan into the services and into the work that you do every day. Okay, so the first step that we're going to cover is the four-factor analysis. And the four-factor analysis is the first step in developing an LEP or language access plan, and it's the process to identify LEP populations within a service area and the significance of the agency's services to that community or population. While every step of the process is important, I do want to highlight specifically factor 1 and 2. These two both use data and reporting to identify LEP communities and how often they interact with agencies. And that's significant, but because it'll shape the rest of the plan. Factor 1 talks a little bit more about just gathering the data. So this can be like we'll look at in a little bit using census data or resources that RTAP provides. So the actual numbers of LEP persons within your community. But factor 2, the frequency with which LEP individuals come in contact with the program, is more about the provider's experience with LEP individuals. So within the resource, I go into further depth about this. And it's like good practice to keep track of how many times you're offering someone language access services or how frequently you run into people who are having trouble accessing the services because of a language barrier. But keeping these things in mind and tracking it allows you to have a better understanding of the frequency with which the LEP individuals come in contact with your program so that you can keep that in mind when you're developing the plan. So sometimes it might be hard just looking at the data to recognize how many people within your community are actually utilizing your services. So maybe your community only has 5% or 10% of the population being LEP, but maybe a higher percentage of those people use your services. So that would be something you would be able to recognize with the frequency of which LEP individuals come in contact. And you could keep that in mind when you're developing your plan later on. And so here I wanted to talk a little bit about how exactly agencies can recognize the LEP individuals in their community. And Kansas RTAP has developed resources to help agencies in Kansas identify communities of limited English proficiency. And in the spring, actually, we published an article that provides a more in-depth walkthrough of the four-factor analysis, but also provides agencies with a step-by-step of how to access the number of population of limited English proficiency people in a geographical area. And we did this through the Census Bureau, so you can go into the Census Bureau and download the demographic data for your county or for the whole state of Kansas. But this helps you look at the numbers yourself, and there's other options for demographic data through the census as well. But luckily, that's a lot of steps, and sometimes that's hard for us to do. And Kansas RTAP does have a resource that we release annually to help agencies identify demographic numbers within their county. So the Kansas County Transit Dependent Resource for this year is available on our website now, and you see that here. But recently it did get a makeover. So before it was kind of just one big table, if you've used this before. And now it's separated by county, so counties can have an easier time looking at just their data. So if you haven't already checked it out, you should, because it has data that can help you for developing an LEP plan, but it also has demographic data that can just help you when applying for any grants as well. Okay. So the next step in developing an LEP plan is making the plan, and specifically making sure to identify the following: providing language assistance services by language, notifying LEP persons about the availability of language assistance, employee training for language assistance, and complaint process. An agency must define what language assistance services they will provide and how they will be available to the people that need them. The resource provides guidance on how best to identify which services would be most effective under certain circumstances. For example, while having access to oral interpretation might be one of the more effective language assistance services, as the person who's there and actually translating can get an understanding of the circumstances that are happening and understand what the person is feeling, it is the most expensive of the language assistance services and may not be the best option for agencies with low LEP populations, especially ones that have low LEP populations and also don't have a high frequency of engaging with LEP populations, that might not be the best option. And honestly is not an option that a lot of agencies in Kansas utilize just because of how expensive it is to have a interpreter. But there are other options for oral translation. And I know a few agencies like FHATA, they utilize, there's online translation services provided by like K-State, and there's other things like that within the state of Kansas that can be utilized. But as I said, this is not always necessary for agencies and counties that don't have a high LEP population. But there's also written translation language services that are available. And the LEP plan is just a space for agencies to kind of decide which language assistance services they're going to be utilizing and why that makes sense based on the demographic data they obtained. So another thing I wanted to touch on here is that you must notify LEP persons about the availability of language assistance. So just like for the complaint process and monitoring, you have to have a notice to the public. There has to be some sort of notification that people who are LEP do have the availability of language assistance services. So sometimes this just means like another little notice that says it's in different languages and says we have language access services. Or sometimes this is on agencies' websites. People do it in a number of different ways. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it. And there are examples given of that within the resource. And then employee training for language assistance. This can seem like it's a big deal, but this just means even employees knowing what to do if someone comes in and they can't speak English. So like if you do have those language assistance cards and it says they can fill it out and it says, I speak Spanish, then that employee would know, like, I need to go get some Spanish resources. So if you have like brochures or things like that that are in Spanish to accommodate them. So this doesn't mean necessarily employees have to go through a training process. This just means that they know what to do in the case of serving LEP individuals. And then another thing I want to note here is that a complaint process is necessary for an LEP plan. But thankfully, it can be the same one that that we set up earlier for the Title VI. So just from the complaint process that we covered at the beginning of this presentation, it doesn't have to be a totally new process, and because they're addressing the same types of complaints. So you can just use the one that you've already developed for the rest of the Title VI, but it just is a requirement for an LEP. So I figured I'd put it in here just so everyone knows exactly like what is required of them for this language access plan. Okay, and then involving the most important part of an LEP or access plan is utilizing the plan and implementing the actions to involve LEP people in both the transit planning process and making sure they receive adequate service. So yeah, like I mentioned with the PIP and with this one, it's good to develop these plans and it's good to have a guide for how you're going to do public engagement. But they're not useful if you don't actually apply the things you put in the plan. So it's just a reminder to look back through your Title VI programs. I'm sure most of you probably already have something developed, and just remind yourself of what is in those plans so that you can apply them to the services. Okay, the next thing I want to touch on, and those are kind of the three biggest things that are within a Title VI program. I know that was a lot of information covered in a short period of time. So if you definitely have specific questions about Title VI program, we can talk about those after this. But these are more requirements, but those are just like the three most important like plans that you have to develop within a Title VI program. So the next thing we're going to cover is demographic representative information. And I know that KDOT has received a few questions about this one. So I'll kind of cover this a little bit. But agencies that have transit-related, non-elected planning boards, advisory councils, or committees, or anything of the like. So any board, committee, council that is related to the transit services you provide. Like the membership of which is selected by the recipient. So that's an important component if they have to be elected. Must provide a table depicting the racial breakdown of the membership of those committees, and a description of efforts made to encourage the participation of minorities on such communities. So The next slide, I'll go into depth about what this table can look like and what it means to have a table that depicts the racial breakdown of a committee. But basically, it's against the law to deny a person the opportunity to participate as a member of a planning, advisory, or similar body, which is an integral part of the program. So we have to prove that we are giving everyone equal access to the opportunity to be on these boards. So like I said, there is a requirement for a description of efforts made to encourage the participation of minorities on such committees. But from our public engagement program and our LEP program, we kind of defined a whole bunch of interventions on how we engage minority groups and disadvantaged groups. And so those same things can be applied to this. You don't have to come up with whole new ways of engaging the public in this way. You can do similar interventions as we've defined both in the public engagement plan and the LEP. But about the table, so this is an example of a demographic breakdown table provided by KDOT. And here it shows an example of boards that could be included in the breakdown. So that was something I also had questions about initially. It was like, well, what does that mean? Like, what planning boards are we referring to? So these are a couple of examples, like the agency board of directors, Citizens Advisory Council, or a finance committee. These can all be examples of boards and all must be included in demographic representative information if you have these boards and if they're elected by the agency. And so here you see that it's compared to the demographic breakdown of the population within that service area, that top line here. And that's important to make sure that the boards, councils, or committees accurately reflect the demographic of the area they're serving, right? So like here you can see like the Latino population of the service area is 28%. And about 25% of all the boards are Latino. And that makes sense with the population. So you want to make sure you're including minority and disenfranchised voices because those are oftentimes the people that are using transit the most. But you also want to make sure that the population on your board is reflective of the population within the service area. So those are two important things to keep in mind. And this might not apply to everyone, but I think most agencies do have an elected planning board. Okay. So everything so far has been generally what everyone who has a Title VI program has to include in their Title VI program. So this is for non-fixed route providers, this is for 5310, this is for 5311. Besides plan approval, which we'll cover here after this one, everything we've covered needs to be within a Title VI program. And I don't know if there are any fixed route service providers here, but fixed route service providers have to have the special requirements that I'm going to cover here briefly, in addition to everything we had just covered. So here it looks like a lot of things, and it kind of is, but I'm not going to go over each specific one of these. But if you are a fixed route provider or work for a fixed route provider and you want more clarification on these, we can definitely cover it later in the question section, or you can email me, of course. So these special requirements include developing system-wide service standards and policies, if not already done so, and clearly stating them in the plan. The standards and policies should reflect the overall vision and goals of the provider, but must specifically include the things listed on the screen. So I will not go into detail about each individual indicator listed here, but if anyone is interested in learning more, I can provide them with further information, or all of this will be covered in the resource as well when it's published. So system-wide service standards, this means having a standard set for the vehicle load for each mode, vehicle head weight for each mode, on-time performance for each mode, and service availability for each mode. So most providers probably already have something like this because it's good to just have metrics of what it means for your service to be performing at a good standard versus not. But I won't go into a specific about each one of those. And then system-wide service policies are having policies regarding the distribution of transit amenities for each mode and vehicle assignment for each mode. So like I said, like most agencies probably have most of these things developed. But also I think even if you do, there's value in looking at the Title VI resource and seeing like what exactly vehicle load for each mode means. And like, are you fulfilling all of the requirements that are necessary for the specific thing? And why it's useful for agencies to have a standard for these indicators. Okay. And finally is plan approval. So like I said, if you're a fixed route service provider, that would be applicable to you. If not, then you don't have to worry about that part. It was just everything we covered prior to that will need to be in your plan. So now you have a Title VI resource that's fully developed and you've met all the requirements for the federal government and for KDOT. So plan approval is required for both first-time applicants and agencies resubmitting their Title VI to KDOT. I believe that the Title VI programs for KDOT are due sometime in November. So this would be applicable to everyone here if they haven't already gotten plan approval. And this means receiving approval of the Title VI program from your local transit planning related board, such as board of directors. And this needs to be documented in a plan somehow. So I know in the past, KDOT has had confusion about this, and some agencies have provided their plan approval in the form of meeting minutes from their board of directors where they had said they approved the plan and then had them sign off on it. KDOT has said that the signing off on it is not necessary, and that for plan approval, all an agency needs to do is put the meeting minutes from their board or board of directors or transit related planning board within the program when they submit it, and that's proof enough of plan approval. I don't think that's the only way you can approve the plan. Like, I think having the board of directors signatures is proof of approval as well, but I know that having the meeting minutes where the plan was approved is just kind of an easy way to do that, and it can be included in the plan during submittal. So I do think KDOT wants that to be how we get plan approval for the Title VI resource. And as I said, this is important for first-time applicants, but it's also something that people who are resubmitting their Title VI program should be aware of too. If they are already used to this process, you do have to have their approval every time you resubmit the Title VI. And something else I want to touch on for plan approval is that once we've developed a Title VI program, sometimes we can become a little complacent in that we have the plan, we know it worked before, so we're just going to resubmit and reapprove the same program. But I urge everyone to take a look at their Title VI programs before they submit them and just make sure the demographic data is up to date. And like I said, Kansas RTAP does provide resources for how to get that demographic data, just so that it's up to date and we're making sure that our public engagement plans and our LEP plans accurately serve the public. So if maybe your LEP population has gone up recently from when you first developed the plan, we might need to add more interventions on how we're going to serve them, or change some of the resources we're using to accommodate LEP people. And I think this is a good time too, before you resubmit, to just take a look at those monitorings that we've covered. So for complaint process and monitoring, making sure that if you have received any complaints, those are all up to date and that they're within the table that you've set up to monitor your complaints. And also within the LEP process, there's that monitoring, if we recall, just to make sure that, again, if there's anything that a complaint submitted for that, we're keeping track. And something I don't think I touched on a little bit ago, in the public engagement plan, I think it's the 6th bullet point, they cover, maybe I should go back. Give me 1 second. I do want to touch on that. Oh yeah, the 6th bullet point is a summary of outreach efforts performed over the past 3 years. So like we talked about with monitoring complaints, you also need to monitor just the good things you're doing too. So like, what outreach performance have you performed over the past 3 years? Like, what have you put into the news, or like the newspaper, sorry, I was going to say newsletter. What have you put into the newspaper? Have you held any public meetings? Have you utilized any of the activities that you've put into your public involvement plan? You should kind of also keep track of that and put this in a summary. This is important for your triennial review, But it's also good to just reflect on every year to see like which interventions you're actually using and what has worked for you. All of these things are important so that you can make your Title VI program better and better serve your community. And I know that this is a requirement and we have to do this, but I think it also provides a lot of good information and can help us better serve. So while I know a lot of times we don't have the resources to be able to go and do a ton of things with public engagement, like I talked about, like the translation services, I think this is just something that you're already looking at the Title VI program in general, so it's easy to just kind of update those little things. And then finally, I wanted to touch on some resources that I use that were super helpful, but also can be helpful to you while we wait for the RTAP resource to be published. So I put just the links to the general website, but also I think you all are familiar with the KDOT website, and then I can kind of tell you how I got to these specific things. So like I said, KDOT has a lot of templates for Title VI. And I know if you email Renee or Taylor, you can get them that way, but they're also available on the KDOT website. So this is the URL to the KDOT website, and all I did was go to the search bar on their website and type in Title VI, and it gives you a whole bunch of resources that they have available. And you can kind of skim through those and find the templates that I was talking about. But again, when the resource is published, they'll all be available in there. And then the next thing that was super helpful that I think most of the resources kind of based off on is the Federal Circular 4702.1b. If you go to the FTA's website and again, go to the search bar and just type in that on the screen, the circular will show up. It's a PDF and it covers literally every single thing that is required within a Title VI program. That's what I use to help develop everything within this presentation. And if you'd ever had a question of like, is this required? What do I need to do for this? While the circular is a little jargony, it is a legal document. It's like 100 pages and has literally everything you could ever need for a Title VI program. It also does have some resources in that as well to help agencies develop their own. Like I was talking about those menus of public engagement strategies and things like that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the Wisconsin DOT resource. So with the Wisconsin DOT, this is a link to their website. And again, you just go to the search bar on their website and type in Title VI. But they have a really great resource that's kind of what I took inspiration for the one that we're developing. And it also has breakdowns of it, like why you're doing things, but then it has templates and checklists and just how to do the actual developing of the plan. So it's a really good resource. Not like KDOT sanctions, it's from a different DOT, but I just think it was valuable and they did a good job. And I think it's also really easy to use and read and could be valuable to all of you. And then finally, I wanted to touch on more resources for the language access planning. There's a really big emphasis on the LEP plan in general in the Title VI. I think it's super important and also just really relevant in recent years. So if you go to this website, lep.gov, it's an entire website devoted to serving LEP populations and has a lot of resources around developing a language access plan. It's again a little jargony just because it is owned and operated by the government. And so sometimes it can be hard to understand, but it does have a lot of resources and it's a good jumping off point to try to find other things. So that's all the resources. And like I said, we are going to be releasing our own resource to help transit agencies in Kansas develop their Title VI programs. But yeah, that was the presentation. Oh, and Taylor put in the chat, if you do not have the meeting minutes, you get a signed letter from your board stating that they approve the Title VI plan. And you do not need both. One or the other will be okay. Oh, thank you, Taylor. Yeah, and I didn't know if there was anything I kind of missed about plan approval. So that's great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, that was all I have. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Yeah, I know that was a lot, and a lot of you probably already have Title VI programs. So I think the important thing for this upcoming November is making sure that we have the plan approval, like Taylor mentioned, and updating those things we already have in place for the Title VI program. And then when the resource comes out and you feel like you're in a good spot to kind of reevaluate some of the things you have in your plan, it'll be a good opportunity to do so. But if anyone doesn't have any questions, I think we're okay. We will be putting this on our YouTube channel so you can refer back to it. And then I will just point out again that we do have the newsletter that covers the 4-factor analysis and the LEP plan. And then we do have those resources available on our website to help you do demographic data. So yeah, I think that's all if no one else has any questions. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you at the next RTAP webinar.